Hello friends, Andrew here, and welcome to a 7-Minute Bible. And we're going to attempt the impossible today, which is I'm going to try and recap or give you an overview of the entire Old Testament in 7 minutes or less. Let's get the timer started, and away we go. So first we have creation and the fall story, which is within Genesis, and it's about the time of 4004 to 2234 BC. And in this, we have the story of beginnings, which is what Genesis means. So we have the creation story, the beginning of sin and death, or what we might term the fall. We have the flood story, and then we have the Tower of Babel story. And so this is all in the first 11 or so chapters of Genesis. And then we get to the beginnings of a nation, of a set-apart group of people that would become known as the Jewish people, or Israel, or Hebrews. And so we have Abraham and his sons, also in Genesis, about 1996 to 1689 BC. So again, during the time of Abraham, we have possibly the story of Job happened around the same time. So just a quick thought on the Jewish Old Testament, so to speak. They wouldn't call it the Old Testament, it's the Hebrew Bible, is they would have sections according to the Torah. That's the first 5 books, so you may have heard that, but you may not have heard about the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim, which is the prophets and the writing. So this is called the Tanakh, which is a acronym for the Torah, Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim. So that's just a quick thought on Jewish thinking as to what the Old Testament was, or what we would call the Old Testament as Christians. So following Abraham, we have the story of his son Isaac, and then the story of his son Jacob, and then from there came the 12 tribes of Israel, including Joseph. And that story is what ultimately concludes the story of Genesis before moving on to Moses and the Exodus. So this is Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, ultimately the story of the rest of the Torah. 1571 to about 1451 BC. So we see the calling of Moses and how things progressed within the 10 plagues and the exodus out of Egypt. We see the giving of the law at Mount Sinai, and then we see a wandering of 40 years in the wilderness because the people of Israel were not convinced that they could enter the land at that time. So after those 40 years, then we shift into Joshua and the conquest story. So this is the book of Joshua, 1451 through about 1443 BC. And so here we have the death of Moses, the crossing into the Jordan after this kind of the passing of the baton, and 7 years of conquering and then settling in the land of Canaan. And then we move into a time of Judges, and then the prophet Samuel, who was also kind of the last judge. And so in Judges especially, which is about 1443 to 1095 BC, we see 7 cycles of sin, bondage, deliverance, blessing. Sin, bondage, deliverance, blessing. So this happens over and over again. It's about the first 300 years of Israel's history, and there were several deliverer judges along the way, hence the name of the book Judges. So we've got Deborah, Samson, Gideon. We've got the oppressors. The main ones are the Philistines. And we are about halfway there, so we're going to speed up a little bit, I hope. David and Solomon are the next portions of the story that we read in the book of Samuel. By the way, in the Hebrew Bible, we would have just Samuel and Kings and Chronicles rather than 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. And so that's something that we then added later. For them, it was just one big book. And so the story of David and Solomon is basically 1085 to 922 BC. And so during this time, Ruth was probably also written. And so we see the story of Samuel, who is, again, the last judge and maybe one of the first of the prophets, who calls Saul. Then Saul is shown not to be the right fit for a king. And then David comes in. David is known as someone who wrote many of the Psalms. And then his son Solomon also wrote many of the Psalms. He also wrote Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Solomon, or the Song of Songs. At this point, things get pretty messy as the kingdom divides in, again, Samuel and then 1 Kings. This is about 922 to 722 BC. So there is a civil war. Israel becomes the northern kingdom, and Judah becomes the southern kingdom. At this point, you have the prophets Isaiah during the reign of Assyria's rise as an empire in Judah, and then also in Judah as the Babylonians came to power is Jeremiah. So then we have the destruction of Israel and Judah in 2 Kings 722 to 586 BC. So this is also the time of the prophets during these time of the kings. We know that the end of the Old Testament includes these prophets. So just to quickly go through some of them is during 1st and 2nd Kings, in order, I'm going to go in order a bit here, rather than realize that they're structured in our Bible as major and minor prophets, not because one is more important than the other, but because some are longer than the other. So you got the major prophets are longer and the minor prophets are shorter. And so it's really just about length. So during the Assyrian Empire, we have Jonah, Joel, Amos, Hosea, Isaiah, Micah, Zephaniah, and Nahum. And then during the Babylonian Empire, we have Jeremiah, Habakkuk, Ezekiel, Obadiah, and Daniel. And then finally in the Persian Empire, we have Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Also during this time, Esther was written. So we have the fall of Israel in 722 BC. Basically, all the kings are wicked by this point, and that's during the Assyrian captivity. There is a revival in Jerusalem before the fall of Judah in 586 BC, and that's where Babylonian captivity begins. We've got about 40 seconds left. So we then see them return from captivity. This is where Chronicles comes into play, which sounds like it's telling the story of all of this, but it's telling it afterwards. So you've got 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings that tell the story, and then 1st and 2nd Chronicles has a new flavor to it. So Cyrus allows the Jews to return to Israel after 70 years. Then you've got prophets, one that doesn't have a book, but Zerubbabel. And then you've got Ezra and Nehemiah, which would have been one book. They are from the line of David. It's a priest and a scribe, a rebuilder. They physically and spiritually rebuilt the temple. So we've got the temple of Zerubbabel. There's our time. Second temple in Judaism. Let's stop that real quick. There we go. And so basically we have the final prophets and the close of the Old Testament. There it is. We made it in just over 7 minutes. So I hope this has been helpful to you. You might want to replay it and slow it down a little bit. But this was a 7-minute Bible, an overview of the Old Testament in 7 minutes. Please don't forget to like, comment, and share this. As well as if you're on YouTube, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell for notification of new content. Thank you so much, and God bless.